In the headlines tonight, Pope Francis leaves Korea with a powerful message for the only divided country in the world. He urges the two Koreas to end hostilities and put aside their differences. South Korea reaches out to the north again, but Pyongyang has yet to answer Seoul's call for dialogue. In the midst of this, a joint military exercise between South Korea and the U.S. begins. The governor of the U.S. state of Missouri orders National Guard troops to Ferguson, the city where clashes between protesters and police have become violent. This and more coming right up at Early Edition at 6. It's August 18th, 6 in the evening here in Korea, live from Seoul. I'm Nahyun Kyung.
And I'm Daniel Chen. Thank you for joining us. We begin with Pope Francis, who has wrapped up his 5-day historic visit to Korea.
The Holy Father boarded a plane back to Rome earlier in the morning. His schedule was very packed until the very last minute of his departure.
And he left a message of peace and reconciliation behind for people on the Korean peninsula. Here's our Connie Kim with our top story.
Pope Francis brought to a close his 5-day trip with a peace and reconciliation mass at Myeongdong Cathedral in Seoul. After entering the church, the Pope reached out to 7 women seated in the front who were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. The pontiff took time to listen to them and adorned a badge that was given to him by one of the former sex slaves. In his address to the hundreds in attendance, Pope Francis conveyed a message of forgiveness. Referring to Korea, a nation divided for more than 60 years, the Pope called for the two Koreas to reunite, calling them brothers and sisters and members of the same family.
Let us pray then for the emergence of new opportunities for dialogue, encounters and the resolution of differences, for continued generosity in providing humanitarian assistance to those in need.
Pope Francis' final public event in Korea was attended by about 1,000 people. Reflecting the pontiff's great interest in the marginalized and poor, they ranged from North Korean defectors and immigrant workers to the survivors and bereaved families of victims from April's ferry disaster. President Park Geun-hye was also present, making it her 3rd meeting with the Pope during his Korea trip. Before the Mass at Myeongdong Cathedral, Pope Francis met with the leaders of other religious groups in Korea, including Buddhists and Protestants, and emphasized the importance of harmony. It's a message that Pope Francis built his visit to Korea around, the first by a pope in 25 years. He made it a point to reach out to those who are suffering and whose voices have gone silent within society, calling for changes and compassion. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, the Pope is widely known for his extra love for the poor and the socially marginalized, hence the nickname the People's Pope.
Well, he gave blessings to many groups in Korea, but his care for one in particular was especially noteworthy. Our Park Ji-won has this report.
Despite his busy 5-day schedule in Korea, the Pope's special love and care for the bereaved families of April's Sewol ferry disaster was evident. His first encounter came last Friday in Daejeon, right before the Pope celebrated his first Mass with the Korean public. During the meeting, the families of the victims gave him a yellow ribbon, symbolizing the hope of the bereaved families, and the pontiff wore the ribbon right away.
We were heartbroken and deeply hurt by the accident. I really wanted to say thanks to the Pope for meeting us. When I saw him wearing the yellow ribbon during the Mass, I was really surprised. I felt renewed strength to go down this difficult path.
Pope Francis wrapped up the Mass with a special prayer for the victims.
In the sinking of the Sewol ferry.
On Saturday, during an open car parade before a beatification mass in Seoul's Gwanghwamun Square, Pope Francis got out of the car and walked towards family members where around 600 had been specially invited. He held hands with the father of a student victim who has been on hunger strike for about a month, urging the parliament to pass a special bill on the disaster to find out the exact cause of the sinking. The man gave the Pope a letter, and he put the letter into his pocket. And on Sunday, Pope Francis baptized another family member of the ferry victims, Lee Ho-jin, upon the request of Lee. It's extremely rare for the Pope to baptize a laity member, but the Pope Francis decided to do it to try and heal his wounded heart. The cross that Lee carried during a month-long pilgrimage over the country was delivered to the Pope, and he will take it back to the Vatican. The Pope's genuine listening not only consoled the hearts of the family members, but also the Korean public who witnessed his gentle love for the suffering families. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And going back to the Pope's final message, despite his message calling for peace on the Korean peninsula, the tensions between the two Koreas linger. Seoul and Washington started joint military drills this Monday, which North Korea sees as a provocation. Here's Kim Min-ji with more.
South Korea and the United States kicked off their annual military exercise on Monday. The computer simulation-aided joint Ulchi Freedom Guardian drills, which run through next Friday, mobilizes roughly 50,000 South Korean and 30,000 U.S. troops. The main purpose of the exercise is to maintain security on the Korean peninsula while upholding joint defense capabilities between the two allies. This year, the exercise will involve the testing of a new tailored strategy, which is aimed at deterring North Korea's nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. The strategy, drawn up at a security consultative meeting last year, stipulates diplomatic and military responses at different levels of threats posed by Pyongyang during times of peace or war. Unlike years gone by, the military exercise comes amid threats from North Korea. Pyongyang on Monday condemned the drill as a declaration of nuclear war. North Korea's Rodong Sinmun said the exercises violate peace on the peninsula, calling it a provocative act that hurts inter-Korean relations. The newspaper added that Seoul and Washington will be to blame for unpredictable situations on the Korean peninsula. Pyongyang also warned merciless preemptive attacks on Seoul during the weekend. The North has long denounced the exercise as a rehearsal for war against Pyongyang, while Seoul insists the drills are defensive in nature. South Korea's military said the exercise will go forward as planned amid strengthened surveillance and security against the North, adding that Seoul will respond firmly and without hesitation if the North engages in any form of provocation. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Aside from the regularly scheduled military drill, South Korea's goal is, of course, peace, and they reach out once again to North Korea, calling on Pyongyang to accept its previous proposal for high-level talks, while laying out a detailed plan for fresh inter-Korean economic cooperation. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
South Korea repeated its offer to North Korea on Monday for a round of high-level talks, saying it's willing to discuss any issue brought to the negotiating table.
If North Korea assumes a responsible stance, we will be willing to discuss any issue for improving inter-Korean ties. I once again urge North Korea to agree to the high-level talks as soon as possible.
If the offer is accepted, the possible lifting of South Korean sanctions against North Korea and the resumption of South Korean tours to Mount Kumgang could be discussed. While South Korea awaits North Korea's response, the Unification Ministry laid out detailed plans for a fresh inter-Korean infrastructure investment project in the report submitted to the National Assembly. These include reconstruction projects for the highway that connects the border town of Kaesong to Pyongyang and the railway that links Kaesong to the northern city of Sinuiju, both of which could begin as early as this year if inter-Korean relations improve. The report also said Seoul would be open to resuming trade and existing economic cooperation projects with the North and starting new ones, depending on the state of inter-Korean ties, hinting at a possible lifting of sanctions. Seoul imposed heavy economic sanctions on Pyongyang in 2010 after North Korea's torpedo attack on a South Korean warship. But in presenting the report to lawmakers on Monday, Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae ruled out the possibility of a unilateral lifting of the sanctions, saying the North must come to the negotiating table first to discuss the issue. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
This past Friday, Korea commemorated the 69th anniversary of its liberation from Japanese colonial rule. And President Park Geun-hye, during her speech, suggested the two Koreas seek to improve cooperative ties in small, non-political projects, such as those involving the environment and culture.
That's right, but Pyongyang so far has shrugged off the president's proposal. For more, we are joined live in the studio by our presidential office correspondent, Choi Yu-sun. Yu-sun, thanks for being here today. So, let's go over some of the key points that President Park Geun-hye made during her speech last Friday.
Well, referring to the history of the divided Korean peninsula as abnormal, President Park highlighted the urgency of preparing for reunification. She said as the anguish generated from the separation of the two Koreas gets passed down from one generation to the next, abnormalities on the divided peninsula have become the norm. In order to bring the two sides back to the table, the South Korean president suggested the prospect of jointly managing the rivers and forests that extend through both Koreas, which is something that would benefit both sides. She also invited the North to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity Conference that's scheduled for this October in the South Korean city of Pyeongchang. On the cultural front, President Park talked about jointly launching a cultural project of some sort next year to mark the 70th anniversary of liberation from Japanese colonization.
Well, bipolar North Korea easily rejected President Park Geun-hye's proposal again.
Right, playing the role of both hawk and dove, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Sunday sent a wreath and a message of condolence in memory of late former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung's passing, which was 5 years ago on this Monday. Meeting with the late president's former aides, including liberal opposition lawmaker Park Ji-won, the North's Kim Yang-gun, who is in charge of inter-Korean affairs, expressed doubt about the sincerity of Seoul's proposals at a time when it's demanding the North abandon its pursuits of a nuclear weapon. North Korea also expressed grievances over annual joint military exercises with the U.S. that started today.
And the North Korean regime considers this training to be a war game.
Right. Kim Yang-gun also stressed that Seoul would need to work towards improving inter-Korean ties without preconditions, adding pressure on the South to lift sanctions that were imposed after the North torpedoed a South Korean warship back in 2010 and to stop demanding nuclear disarmament. In its list of demands to Seoul the day before Liberation Day, Pyongyang also talked about a complete stop to Seoul's military drills with Washington and added that the non-political and civilian exchanges that President Park is suggesting are actually already included in the past declarations between the two Koreas.
So what's the prospect now? From the looks of it now, it looks like the two Koreas will continue to be in a political tug-of-war.
Right. Well, even if Pyongyang wanted to come to the high-level talks, it will likely wait until Seoul and Washington's military drills come to an end at the end of this month. But with the Park administration reaching out to Pyongyang as of late, saying the agenda at the high-level talks could be open to all matters of concern between the two Koreas, including the lifting of sanctions, there's a possibility the North may just take the South up on the offer. Lawmaker Park Ji-won said he felt that the North Koreans were anticipating renewed relations with the South and that they considered President Park to be more sincere with her North Korea policies than her predecessor. And President Park's latest proposal contained initiatives that would actually be of interest to the North Koreans, such as environmental conservation projects and improving agricultural infrastructure in the North. On the other hand, Seoul has no intention of removing the sanctions unless Pyongyang first takes full responsibility for sinking the warship Cheonan in 2010. So even if the two Koreas sit down for talks, fundamental differences will remain. But let's keep our hopes up and see what happens in the coming weeks with the North set to respond to the offer for talks and its plans to compete in the upcoming Asian Games here in the South.
Well, let's hope for something positive to develop in the near future. Thank you, Yusun, for that report.
My pleasure.
Now for today's Industry Insight, we are going to be talking about fast fashion brands.
Fast fashion. Officially, they are called SPA brands. Korean companies are considered latecomers to that industry, but that hasn't tampered down their big aspirations.
And our Connie Lee has more on this.
Simply put, SPA brands sell trendy items at competitive prices. Currently, these SPA brands, or fast fashion brands here in Korea, take up about 8% of the fashion industry, but with the potential to grow even more. Now, the top three biggest SPA brands are Uniqlo, Zara, and H&M, which saw some record-breaking sales last year. Now, data shows that the total sales of the top three brands last year topped 1 trillion won, or more than $980 million US. Now, that number is up nearly 31% from the year before. But despite the tight competition, the local SPA brands are fighting on to rival their successful foreign counterparts in Korea, as they also try to expand globally. Here's a closer look.
They are the so-called fast fashion brands, or SPA brands, easily seen in Seoul's busy shopping districts. Over the past couple of years in Korea, there's been a growing demand for these SPA brands, with both foreign and domestic firms flooding the streets here in Korea.
I like these kinds of brands because their prices are reasonable and they have styles that are liked by most people.
SPA, short for Specialty Retailer of Private Label Apparel, had a market worth of about 500 billion won in the Korean market back in 2008, but has since grown to about 3 trillion won, or about $2.8 billion US in 2013.
The SPA brands are changing the paradigm of the fashion industry in Korea. Before, we saw brands more focused on their brand image, but now it's about the retail store's image and how to meet the exact demands of its customers.
SPA brands do it all, from design to manufacturing and retailing. Thus, the prices are lower and new items can be produced at a faster rate.
For many of these retail stores of SPA brands, there are new products that come in almost weekly. And for this store, apparently there are new products that are delivered every day.
Currently, the three biggest SPA brands in Korea are not homemade. They are Japan's Uniqlo, one of the first SPA brands to enter Korea in 2005, and Spain's Zara, and Sweden's H&M. The local brands, which are latecomers to the SPA world, however, are not afraid to join in on the competition. Retail conglomerate Elan Group, which introduced Korea's first SPA brand called Sewol in 2009, currently has more than 10 such brands under its belt. Their aim is global expansion, first by conquering Asia.
We found success with our first stores abroad in China and Japan, so we now plan to increase the number of our SPA brand stores in China to 50 next year. We have an edge over our foreign competitors because we design and produce according to the specific tastes of our Asian consumers.
And back in Korea, the already diluted market of SPA brands is still vied by newcomers from abroad. Canadian label Joe Fresh was recently introduced, and the UK's popular Topshop are apparently eyeing the market.
Global companies could see Korea as a test market, as Korean consumers are now recognized as trendsetters and fast adapters.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Face a one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Na Hyung-kyung and Daniel Che.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
Now, the governor of the U.S. state of Missouri has signed an executive order to deploy National Guard troops to Ferguson. That's the city gripped by racial tensions and violent clashes. A curfew is currently in effect for a second day. But earlier in the evening, Sunday local time, several tear gas canisters were thrown in multiple directions at a major intersection where crowds had gathered to protest what they perceive as racially motivated police violence. Local police held a press briefing a couple of hours ago, saying they had to use force to protect the people and property. All of this, of course, comes some 9 days after the unarmed African-American teenager Michael Brown was shot and killed by a white police officer. According to Brown's family attorney, a private autopsy shows the teen was shot at least 6 times, including twice in the head.
We shift gears to a different story now. Following last week's key rate cut by the Bank of Korea, commercial banks are said to be planning on lowering their average deposit interest rates. Experts say this could bring about an adverse effect on the elderly who lean heavily on interest given by banks as their source of income. Our Kim Ji-yeon has more.
These days, it's considered almost impossible to save money from the interest given by local banks.
I'm having a hard time making ends meet because the interest rate can't catch up with inflation.
Deposit interest rates here in Korea have dropped sharply over the last 6 years. The one-year fixed deposit rate that reached 5.87% in 2008 slipped to 2.68% in June. The rate has continued tumbling over the last 2 months, with most commercial banks offering interest rates in the low 2% range. It's expected to go down even further after the Bank of Korea cut the benchmark interest rate by 0.25 percentage point to 2.25% last week. It may not be long before interest rates are in the 1% range since the local economy is not showing strong enough signs of improvement.
We'll closely monitor the effects of the rate cut and come up with appropriate measures to deal with changes to consumer behavior and household debt.
Japan experienced a similar situation and entered an ultra-low interest rate era. The fixed deposit rate averaged at 0.35% at its highest. The elderly suffer the most since many of them live off the interest of their savings. Experts say Korea should come up with countermeasures such as raising pensions if it wants to avoid social and economic problems stemming from low interest. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Well, on the flip side, debt holders welcome the central bank's rate cut. The Financial Supervisory Service expects households and companies to pay around $1.8 billion less in interest payment annually as a result. Moving on, it's almost never fun to play the blame game, but apparently there is a group which the nation's top conglomerates think should take the blame for Korea's economy falling into a slow growth trap. Our Hwang Ji-hye tells us which group that is.
A new survey suggests Korea's legislative branch is to blame for the stall in government efforts to spur growth. More than 80% of the nation's 30 biggest conglomerates surveyed by the Joseonilbo Daily said the National Assembly was stifling economic progress. They pointed to the delayed passage of major economic stimulus bills as the reason. More than half of the companies said they would expand investments and hire more employees once the related legislation passes. Earlier this month, Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan urged the parliament to pass 30 long-pending stimulus bills as soon as possible. 19 of them have been awaiting approval by the National Assembly for more than a year now. After Finance Minister Choi took office in mid-July, the government laid out a set of aggressive stimulus measures expressing concerns about the possibility of a long, slow growth trend resembling that of Japan. If the bills aren't passed soon, experts are concerned the golden time to maintain recovery momentum could be missed. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Well, it was a cool and rainy day here in Seoul.
Right, light drizzles here in Seoul. But things are looking a bit more extreme in other parts of the nation. So let's turn to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center for details. Michelle.
Good evening. The drizzles that were falling here in the capital have stopped at the moment, but it's raining heavily in the southern regions where warnings and advisories are in effect. Now, the rain is forecast to continue until tomorrow evening for most regions, with totals reaching up to 100 millimeters in the southern regions and between 5 to 40 millimeters in Seoul and Gyeonggi province. Now, a word of warning: if you happen to be in the southwest of the country, the heavy precipitation has increased the possibility of landslides. Now, some areas have landslide warnings and advisory in effect, so do take caution. Now, along with the rain, a chilly night is expected, and tomorrow we can expect similar conditions to today, with cooler temperatures in Seoul with light rain and heavy rain in other regions. Now, going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will top out the Tuesday morning at 21 before reaching up to 25 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top out at 26 and 25 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Walen tops to 27, while Dokdo and Mangkeungang both tops to the low 20s. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Well, thank you for that, Michelle. That's all we have for you at this hour. Thank you for staying with us. If you're tuning in from different time zones out of Korea, have a wonderful day. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Na Hyun-kyung. To our viewers in Korea, have a great rest of the evening. Daniel and I will be back tomorrow.